Welcome to today's episode. Following up on last week, we're going to be starting this off with extending as if we're closing opposition for round 5 of the IITB last week. So, the motion for this round was info slide. I won't read it, but basically the belief that God created the universe and after that has left it and is not involved in its day-to-day operations. And basically, this helps prefers a world with a widespread belief in Deus Altius. So, the way that this is going to work is we're going to firstly do a bit of statement generation. After that, we're going to see what would be the most optimal way to go about this after we have the statements during prep. And secondly, finally, we're going to look at some scenarios and how we could handle each and every one of these scenarios for this specific motion. Actually, yeah, before it, I switched the slides. Comments on these types of motions. The first thing is that these motions are more illustrations and selling intuitions rather than providing structural analysis, because these types of motions are very abstract in nature. Firstly, because like it's a total change of what the material reality is going to be, when we have a specific concept of how religion works. But secondly, it's also about religious, which is a bit more of an abstract concept. Secondly, there's also many mitigatory factors, but you can never symmetrize something to be 100% true. So you can, for example, if you like to say, let's say if this is an example argument, but if we lower the amount of religion, this will mean that we have like less biases, less discrimination, things like that. Another team may respond by saying, oh, but there are other reasons as to why this might happen. This is perfectly fine, but you can't really completely destroy this. Obviously, religion to a certain extent influences these factors. So keep in mind that why is this important? Because I see many debaters use the strategy of, oh, let's symmetrize this, let's symmetrize that. But in reality, these things do have an impact. And finally, always tied to the motion, the specific thing that you're going to analyze, so that way you can prove that it is, in fact, comparative. So, let's do similar to the previous videos, let's do a bit of statement generation. So, I was able to generate basically 4 broad ideas of how you could go about a case from closing opposition. The first is that the fact that God is present and is engaged in the day-to-day operations of the universe means that this creates a moral foundation of deterrence, similar to how there's a concept of God will strike you if you do XYZ thing. Secondly, is that this leads to a loss of comfort and coping mechanisms. People being able to find comfort when they're praying to God and explaining bad things to them. Thirdly, that this undermines religious practices because you have a personal relationship with God. So, for example, if you do things like fasting or you do things like going and doing prayers, that the reason that you're doing this is because you know that God is watching, God is doing these things, so you're less inclined to do these things if, let's say, a God isn't present. And finally, that this leads to a loss of belief in God. So these are generally 4 ideas that you could go about in an opposition case here. So what is then the difference from the previous videos that we're going to cover here? So the most important thing when extending, and I think this is what people really get wrong, and that's that you shouldn't, there are basically 2 mistakes. You shouldn't, on the one hand, focus exclusively on one argument saying, this is our extension, this is going to be the thing that we're going to run, because you risk, to a large extent, a team running that argument and you being pushed to either not have an extension at all, repeating them, or just trying to run something in the last minute. There is another problem here where you spend too much time talking about too many things within the case of all of the ideas that you have, and which ultimately leads to you not actually having anything when you go into the prep and you having to write the extension as you go. This is fine if you are very, very experienced and very, very good at writing cases. However, for the majority of debaters, this is bad. You have to have something written when you go there. So obviously there's a middle ground between these two concepts, and the middle ground is this, which is identifying what are the crucial burdens of an argument as a first step. So how does this work? Let's say we take 2 ideas. We don't take all 4 ideas because we need to, after all, do this in, let's say, 5-6 minutes of prep. So what are the crucial burdens? Well, if we look at the first argument, there are 3 of them. Basically, why religion helps for morality, why does God's presence create deterrence, why is this a particularly strong deterrence? Now, as you can see, I've separated on the right side these burdens as a must-have and a nice-to-have. And it's a very good way to look at the burdens, because must-have burdens are ones that if they are not explained, the argument fundamentally doesn't work. So let's say you have an opening team that misses a must-have burden within the round, and you provide analysis for this specific must-have burden. You can easily explain their argument doesn't work absent of this contribution that we give to the round. Nice to have burdens are burdens that empower the argument. They do make it strong, but they're not fundamentally crucial to the existence and functioning of the argument itself. Obviously, this is a very thin line, and sometimes you may scam yourself to that maybe a must-have argument is a nice-to-have and vice versa, but using this formula will allow you to determine in the prep what is the most crucial way of analyzing this argument and where should you go about. I see many teams that just, for example, either can't identify burdens properly, or they don't even think about this concept, which creates a problem because then you go into the round from CG or CO, and you ask yourself, okay, explain this burden of the argument, this burden, but I have the third burden, which is why is this a particularly strong deterrent? And you provide this explanation. This explanation may even be relevant to the debate, but if it's not crucial, a must-have burden, then you can't extend on them. Or in the majority of cases, you can't really do this. So having this framework actually helps you a lot. Second argument, which is loss of comfort and coping mechanisms, the burdens here are: why does a present God create value in prayer or other practices? Why does a present God make us cope easier with problems? So these are again 2 must-have burdens that you need to explain, and we've identified them. Here I wasn't even able to think of a nice-to-have burden. So this should take maybe something like 3 to 4 minutes. I guess if you are less experienced, it's normal for it to take 5 to 6 minutes. But if you spend on this time, let's say more than 5 minutes, that's a problem. So basically the process looks like: pick out a couple of ideas, ask yourself, okay, which of these ideas should we are like debate winning and we should go with them, and then ask yourself, okay, within these 2 arguments, what are the burdens that must be met for the argument to be true or to be working? What are must-have burdens, nice-to-have burdens? This framework gives you a roadmap to the debate. Think about it literally as like you're on an RPG game and you are trying to make the map of the world that you are playing in. And after that, all you have to do is actually go the distance. So actually explain the argument. So this is what we're going to do in the next slide. So we're going to provide reasons for each particular burden. So that way, when we go into the prep, after we finish prep and we go into the room, we have reasons ready. So what's the logic here? The logic is, if you're able to explain kind of okay, it doesn't have to be the most perfect explanation, but to the core burden, the core analysis that must be there, you're later, after you're in the round, you're either able to expand on it, or you're able to have it already as you go into the prep. Now, obviously, you have to track in the round. So when you when you've written down the analysis, you need to listen to if the opening team actually takes this analysis, and you have to like literally with the pen scratch it off. They've taken this, and if they've taken enough of this said material, you just scratch the whole argument and you throw it away. But then you probably ask yourself, okay, but why are we doing this if there's such a chance? Well, firstly, you don't know what will happen. The round is totally random. But secondly, many times teams either misidentify whole burdens or misidentify whole arguments. So you actually being able to have the generic case and just stand up from CO and win with it because all made a mistake, that's their problem. That's not your problem. You can still run the generic case and go with that if you position and you explain how your contributions interact within the debate. So, what is the analysis? So to the first burden, which is why religion helps form morality. Well, religion is basically the first way humans try to explain reality to themselves and form a collective identity on the basis of rules and regulations. So if you look at, and because it's a first motion, we're looking from the beginning of time. When the first tribes formed, they needed to explain themselves. They looked up into the stars, into the sea, into the woods, and they said, "Oh, there must be some kind of divine being here." And after that, in order for you as like the chief to control the tribe, you created all of these rules and regulations. Thus, you created the first type of morality. And this is a particularly strong formation of morality because like this is the first way that we formed it, and because the explanation of religions is inherently irrational, because you believe in the otherworldly, the supernatural, these things that necessarily cause humans, because they are uncertain on whether or not these things are true or not, to at least be very afraid and follow these rules and regulations. So an illustration here would be like, for example, rules like thou shalt not kill in Christianity, zakat in Islam, where they donate money to charity, and not eating certain foods and things like that. So this analysis proves the link that there is an inherent correlation between religion and the formation of morality. Second burden: why does God's parents create a deterrent? Again, this is a must-have burden. The illustration here is, and as I said before, illustrations here are much more important as a seller of the mechanism rather than the structural analysis, even though we will have it later, is that both that this is a rewards mech and a harm mech. So as a rewards mech, you say, you do things like, you perpetuate things like, for example, if you do good, God will make good things happen to you, God will reward you. That's why you have like the concept of zakat in Islam, where if you donate to people, God will bring good things to you after some time. Or the reverse is true: if you do bad things will happen to you. This could be due to you doing like big or small injustices. For example, big injustices like robbing or murdering someone, small injustices like lying or doing a prank someone or things like that. And after that, this will cause bad things to you, like for example your relatives becoming sick, you getting caught by the police, and things like that. Now, these are strong illustrations that people buy into due to two reasons. The first is that because God is all-powerful, he knows what you're doing and he will do this to you. This creates a feeling that you are being watched all the time, so it creates an adverse deterrence for you to act. You will never act because you know God will see, which will cause God to later do something bad towards you, which stops you in many of these cases. But the second reason is the harm of the action is big, right? And most likely the church has a strong incentive to perpetuate it this way, or not church, but like any religious organization, because they want to keep society in control. They want to be able to control the masses so that we have, either because of practical reasons you want to have a manageable society, or because of personal reasons that they want to be an authority figure. So this narrative is both very susceptible to people and highly perpetuated in society, which will cause them to be deterred from taking bad actions and things like that. And you could give the nuance here that since religion is perpetuated to you since you are very young, this causes you to be, in general, to form a morality of fear of God and like of wanting the good things from God, which later scales later in your life, and you already are instilled with the idea to not do bad things and things like that. So another way to think about this is, while we're analyzing, is hold on, maybe the opposition here actually could respond to this argument by saying, okay, well, why doesn't the concept of hell and heaven reach the same impact? So let's say God is not in the universe, but there is still eternal damnation, eternal salvation, based upon this. Why do you need to have God within it now? So this is a response that government could give, and until this moment really does damage the case that comes from, let's say, a theoretical opening opposition in this moment. So you could say, aha, if this is a good response, let's think of reasons to counter this response. Still, think about it this way. We're in prep, we're simulating right now. So here are some reasons, firstly, that it's not immediate. People think that could happen to them right now, like, for example, a relative getting sick or something like that, as opposed to you later in your life when you're 80, dying, and then having to face the problem of hell and heaven. People are just short-termistic like that. Secondly, there's usually the concept of repenting, that you can just pray away all of the bad things that you've done. That, for example, churches have an incentive to like perpetuate a lot of you just being able to repent your sins and be cast into heaven. The structural reason is you want to expand your congregation as much as possible, so you also want the sinners within that. And thirdly, it's very easy to go into this mentality of I will go to hell anyway, my ticket is signed. However, there you could as a person understand that there are extents and maybe God doesn't punish you now, but if you steal again, if you harm someone again, God will punish you in the future. So these responses directly analyze and deal as to why this response is not functioning, is not actually destroying the case. And again, this is a significant response that really does deal with a large portion of the case. So I hope I was able to illustrate this as much as I can, but this is how in a real prep this may come out. You will identify the burdens, and then in prep you could figure out, but maybe they have this response back. Let's just in case write analysis or responses or whatever you like to call it against this response, so that we have that in this day. I hope it was pretty easy to visualize. So up until this moment, again, this should take us around something like 3 to 4 minutes or something like that. If we're less experienced, obviously it will take us more time. But what we have is for the core argument, we have the core mechanisms. And let's say we have just a bit more time, we can do the same for the other argument as well. So like basically, again, same mechanism. Why does the presence of God create value in prayers and other practices? The basic explanation here is that people want to have a personal relationship with God, that God hears their prayers, that God can offer guidance, that God can, for example, push them to do certain things, which makes the whole process seem special to them. Akin to, for example, you talking to a parent, or you talking to someone who is close to you, who is like all present and can do this. Importantly, religious practices are hard. So, for example, doing things like fasting, going to church every day and stuff like that requires a cost that you are bearing as a participant within them. So people need to have a strong motivating factor to do this, i.e. God being able to hear them right now in order to engage in these practices that are good. Like you, for example, can have a community in your local church. You, for example, can find catharsis or some kind of meaning within your heart when you are praying to them. And in general, this leads to practical benefits to you as an individual. Despite many debaters actually hating on religion. The flip side of this, well, not flip side, but the other side of this burden is, why does the present God make us cope easier with our problems? And the framing here is that bad things will inevitably happen to you. Your relatives will most likely pass away. In some moment, you will lose your job. There may be some kind of black swan event like economic crisis, war, poverty, and things like that may hit you. And basically, people need to find some kind of rationalization of this. And basically, there are two ways that religion rationalizes this. Either by saying that he is testing us, which gives us a motivation for us to push through and to actually make our lives better materially. So, for example, if we lose our job, he's testing me, he wants me to be a better person, I'll go find another job. Or, if a relative passes, well, that's part of the plan, of the experience of existing, of creating new life and all of these things, so I should still continue on. Or another version of this is that there is at least someone to pray to share your feelings. So like if you're feeling down, if you're feeling very demoralized or bad, you can, for example, pray to God. You can, for example, find some kind of meaning and do these things. So this gives us like an explanation that makes us cope and feel not so bad about ourselves and take positive action to make our lives better, which religion does for many people. So now you may be worried up until this moment that this is a lot of things. But ultimately, the more you do it, the faster you will become in these type of things. The recap of the process is, we think of ideas. We see which of these ideas we could run as a potential extension. We identify the burdens for both arguments, and then we try to give the generic or skeleton version of the explanation within these two arguments, in order to see where are the potential zones where we could extend. So, what happens now? Prep time is, now imagine it this way, prep time is over, we go into the room, what will we do now? Now there are a couple of scenarios that we could look at as to how a debate could play out. There are 3 of them, to see what we should do in each and every one of these scenarios. So scenario one, which is providing a vertical extension to either one or both arguments, but I would tell you sincerely to do of one. So this is the following scenario. Opening opposition runs both arguments. They don't successfully run both of these arguments. They're maybe not like that much of a good team, and there maybe skip some burdens here and there. The important thing is to track how much analysis they have and where. And again, think about it this way. There are burdens that are must-haves, there are burdens that are nice-to-haves. If they're only analyzing burdens that are nice to have and they're missing a crucial burden that's a must-have, then you're perfectly fine. You can say, we agree with everything OO says, however, they don't analyze this one particular burden, which means their case doesn't work. Or another thing could be, maybe they analyze this burden, it's crucial, but they miss this burden, which means that their logical train breaks. You need to analyze this. So here are some tips that are good for instance for such situation. The first is, do not listen to OG or maybe even CG and outsource this job to the opposition whip, who anyway has to respond to them. You know, like the whip has to actually be a destructive speech, so there isn't really that much a point of view listening to these speeches. Rather, you should be, especially if you're new, you should focus on just writing the extension, making sure you have an extension, and how you position it towards your opening. Occasionally, maybe a government team in the debate may say something that could be crucial, like a response to the opposition case that you should note down. In this case, the opposition whip can communicate this to you. But in most cases, it's not necessary. And in most cases, you really, as a CO extension, you don't really have to listen to a government bench at all. Like, you can just win with the case. Secondly, and this is a mistake that most people do, don't track everything from opening opposition. Track as if you're judging it, where you evaluate the different contributions of the analysis, whether or not the analysis hits the mark on certain burdens and things like that, and whether or not the argument is explained to enough for you to buy it. So, a good side tip to this tip would be judge more debates. So that way you, in general, see what judges buy, how much analysis they need for certain things to be bought, and things like that. Ultimately, by the end of the deputy leader of opposition, you should have a must-have burden that you can fill to an extent to successfully extend from. If there is no such a situation, although in this theoretical situation we are assuming that there is the case, you should have the checklist. This is the burden that they missed. This is how we're going to explain it, and this is why this burden is crucial for us to accept this argument. Like, these are questions that you must answer. Again, we're looking at a theoretical situation here. Obviously, the debate could play out in a couple of more ways, but in this situation, this should be the first minutes of your speech. You should say, this is the OO case, this is the problem with it, this is how we're going to fill it up. Cool. Scenario 2, total new argument. So this is a scenario that most likely works if you're up against good teams and you're analyzing teams that can actually like make a case and can cover two arguments. These are not that many teams, but there are some of them, or maybe they are so shallow motions, for example, where there are just two arguments. So in this case, you need to listen very carefully. So here's an important observation of this type of team. You should be able to know by the leader of opposition whether or not you're in such a situation. I.e., if you have a very good speaker who is, let's say, a leader of op and can comprehensively analyze both of these cases, explain them well, and run them and push them out, you should be able to know by the leader of opposition that that is the case. There is a spectrum here, obviously, and there is a situation, let's say, where the leader of opposition analyzed them almost ready. Like, they almost explained everything that there is to explain to that particular argument. Then there is a high risk that the DLO may backload the extra explanation to basically ensure these arguments that they are for them. So there are two scenarios here within the scenario. If the leader of opposition is able to explain both arguments, you're already in this situation. But if the leader of opposition explains them to, like, let's say 80, 90%, and all it takes is the DLO is to invest another minute and a half, 2 minutes, again, you're in this situation. Like, it's better to not risk it at all and to just assume that you are in this extremely bad situation for yourself. If you are, you should be able to evaluate by the end of the leader of opposition. So what are you supposed to do then? From the other arguments that you have, right, that you've written in the statement list, you don't throw them away. You need to start developing a whole new case. don't worry, you have time. You have the deputy prime minister, the deputy leader of opposition, and the extension speaker from side closing government. What's that? That's like 21 minutes of time that you can perfectly write a case. It doesn't have to be the greatest case ever written, but it's plenty of time for you, for example, to write down the case and be okay. Importantly, you shouldn't be scared of taking the second, but also maybe the third in these situations, because securing anything other than the fourth is crucial. I've been in so many debates where closing opposition chooses not to do this and rather extend, in the brackets, on arguments that we have a missing hole on, and just take the fourth because they're just EPLing us, or not even EPLing us. ESL teams do this as well, where they just they think they're extending, but in reality they're not, which causes them to like lose the debate. So, bottom line is, by the DLO, you should be able to have most of your new argument develop, and you need to basically have to answer yourself, should I trade off trying to beat opening opposition versus trying to take the second in the debate? Because obviously when you are extending, maybe you need to just bite the bullet and destroy the gov teams and have a point and lose to 0-0 and take the second, rather than trying to beat 0-0. In certain cases, it's good to try to beat the 0-0, maybe as a practice as well. But this is what you need to do in this specific scenario. As you probably would notice, this is the worst case scenario that you can do, but it's something that you can ultimately. And then scenario 3, where opening opposition sufficiently runs one argument. In these types of situations, you need to have clear weighing between each of these arguments. So in the first scenario, where we're weighing deterrence versus relationship with God, or we are running deterrence as an extension and they're running relationship with God as an argument, the weighing here is very simple. All you have to do is just explain that the harms are bigger, that the bigger harm is stopped. So if we are talking about, in our extension, things like, for example, stopping future criminals who rob stores, who, for example, sell drugs, who go into prison and later become even worse criminals down the line, and are bad for society, that this creates a utilitarianly greater harm than, let's say, some kind of, it is significant obviously, but some kind of harm of not having an adequate relationship with God. And here you could give illustrations like that these harms are material. In certain cases, we're talking about the violence between people. That these harms also harm other people because, for example, if we have a lot of prisoners, we have to increase taxes and basically to build prisons and to take care of these people. And so there are many multiple ways for you to weigh this argument off simply based on the amount of harm that is given. The flip side of things is a bit harder, because if we're comparing the relationship with God with deterrence, we actually need to do a lot more legwork with in order to prove why this argument is more important than the upper argument. This argument is easier to prove on the other side, so like the explanation, the analysis itself is not that big. However, this trades off with actually having to prove that your lower impacts are stronger than their higher impacts. So there are a couple of ways to do this. The first is that there are other things that may lead to deterrence and that there are incentives to do this. These are things like courts, jail systems. These are things like locking people up, that people think all about this, and that religion is not inherently, uniquely something that creates deterrence. However, our argument with the relationship of God is a unique in this case. Why? Because it's literally about praying. It's literally about things that are directly correlated with your capacity as a religious person to experience these practices and to feel good about yourself, since religion is such a huge part of your identity. So basically, their argument has a leap that could be filled by other things. Our argument has no such leap. It's direct and it is uniquely made this way. Secondly, you could point out to mitigations from government side that they could give. So, for example, if there are rebuttals, let's say, of the sort, well, the concept of heaven and hell could still deter people. You could point it out to say this responds to opening opposition, but this doesn't respond to us, and it's actually a severe damage to their case. Now, guys, let pause here. If OO actually responds to this, then maybe it's a bad idea to still pretend, this thing completely destroys their case when it doesn't, but it's still a technique that you could use in debating. And finally, you could just point out that, like, the higher the impact, the higher the burden, right? So, like, basically the case that they're making is that criminals will be now deterred based upon this, but you could just point the obvious by saying most criminals are not deterred either through jail or either through court systems or things like that. What is there left for God? Many of these people are not religious. They're not particularly interested in these type of things. And, like, the burden that the opening opposition needs to explain to prove this is super, super high. Then all you have to do is just say, okay, in comparison, we may have a lesser harm, but this harm applies to a larger group of people because many people feel this way with God. Many people have this personal relationship and engage in these things. Not all people are criminals, and not all people are victims of criminal crimes, etc., etc. So, importantly, this should be either at the beginning of the speech when you're positioning the extension, or by the end of the speech when you are comparing yourself to opening opposition. But it's crucial that you must have a direct comparison within the extension speech. Why? Because unfortunately, not many judges listen to the web speakers. You've probably experienced this. So it's crucial to explain why you win the debate right off the bat. Cool. This is the process more or less. Obviously, it's not like a very perfect process because maybe there are other ways to extend. Maybe I didn't cover everything within this motion, but I wanted it to be as theoretically close to a real situation as possible, and try to give you. And if you are in closing opposition in this week's tournament, you can also comment to tell me if this is helpful or if you did incorporate one of these tactics. Cool. I hope to put out more videos about this tournament this week, and yeah, see you in the next video.